If you missed the last episode on the Filet, go back, listen to the strange tale, because this one picks up about where that one leaves off, and it only gets stranger.
Gorgeous, baby. You're gorgeous.
This is the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. The show that everybody's talking about. The show that will become a necessary part of your weekly mental diet. The show that picks up where JoshRolfe.com leaves off. The show title that uses the word podcast 4 times. Introducing your host, Josh Rolfe.
The Filet featured in this 2-part series is of the O-fish variety. Filet O-fish variety. And it wasn't just any regular fillet of fish, it was life-size. And it came to 2 stoned high goners who were doing some sort of drug and were used to hallucinating as part of the escape-filled experience of leaving the real world, especially one that they lived in. Welfare, couldn't hold jobs, depression. They just wanted to escape and join another world entirely. The unhappy couple remained unhappy during their drug binges, but they were well acquainted with drug use and abuse, handling their episodes as responsibly as one can. They were tied to reality enough during the current scene to know that they were both seeing the same thing. A human-sized Filet-O-Fish sandwich leaning against their couch. Presumably because it couldn't sit on the couch. It was somewhat rigid in form, not jointed or flexible. It could only lean against another object. And as the couple spoke back and forth, one after another, to each other, they realized the drugs were either causing both their minds to see the same exact thing, or they were actually, in reality, both seeing a life-sized fillet of fish that could move through a doorway and make itself mostly comfortable against the couch. The couple stood speechless. Well, they weren't both standing. He was standing, she was still sitting. And they were absolutely speechless for about 5 long minutes. 5 minutes that seemed and felt like 5 days in their distorted version of time and space. Meanwhile, the fillet of fish just leaned there. They weren't sure whether to talk to it, eat it, or ask it to leave. It was at this point that the most unusual thing happened. The giant fillet of fish began to throb and pulsate as if it was hemorrhaging or about to explode into a mess of bread, fish, cheese, and tartar sauce. And then it stopped. This caused them to be even more stunned, not knowing what was going to come next. They stared, and they stared some more, fixated, not taking their eyes off this thing, completely in awe, waiting for some kind of signal that would tell them this is, in fact, real. This is not going away, and this would somehow change their fortunes forever. At least these were the thoughts going on in his mind. Whether it was a dream of opening an exhibit to showcase this oddity, or another dream, monetizing YouTube videos of this freak phenomenon. There was bound to be some way to bank their find. The find that found them. It was at about this time that the man opened his mouth for the first time since the fillet of fish had welcomed itself into their home. "Who are you?" he asked. The man was lean, 80s hair, late 30s, light blue eyes with a poorly groomed mustache, and a calm, matter-of-fact demeanor that had Raising Arizona written all over it. However, the fillet of fish did not respond. It said nothing. It just leaned there against the couch. Since she was only a few feet away, the blonde, frizzy-haired woman, overweight, looked about 20 years older than her actual age of 37. She leaned toward the McDonald's menu item, sitting Indian style, and began to reach out her hand to touch its bun. And her hand, tips of her fingers, were only a foot away from making physical contact with the creature. Just at that moment, the man instinctively backed away, entirely speechless in his shock that his wife of a few months was about to touch the otherworldly visitor, when at that very instant, the fillet began to slowly tilt away from the couch, slowly coming toward the woman, causing her, as it started falling toward her, to raise her arms over her head in a defensive position. And then it fell on her. And instead of stopping at her crossed arms, which were the highest point of her body, it fell right through her arms, right over her, onto the floor, her body bursting through its center, its core, in a sloppy mess of filet, and fish. Just at that moment, there was another knock at the door. It was me. I had been employing the man on a congressional campaign that I was managing. He was knocking doors for me, dropping off flyers all throughout this 20-county-wide district. Huge geographical area. I was his transportation, and he was about to clock in for the day. At that particular day, it was 5 a.m., still dark out, a little cool outside in the early spring. We had to drive a few counties away to begin knocking doors. When you throw in breakfast there, we were going to hit the doors around 9 a.m. The man yelled for me to come in. And I saw, as soon as I opened the door, what had happened. His wife was on the floor, looking passed out on her stomach. My mostly loyal employee was standing nearby, staring down in her direction. A Filet-O-Fish sandwich was smashed on the floor beside her, remnants of it smeared across the carpet and on the seat of her pants. He then told me everything that had just happened, that I have just relayed to you, and said, "Do you see it? Do you see the big thing?" "I don't see a big one," I told him. I see a regular-sized Filet-O-Fish sandwich on the floor that your wife somehow sat on as she passed out. It looks like she rolled over it. "Oh," he said, looking calm, less bewildered, and then instantly satisfied. "Oh," he repeated, shrugged his shoulders as if this was usual activity in his life. While he was getting ready for work, I cleaned up the mess. Took a little while. A lot of rags, a lot of paper towels. But I finally cleaned it all up, threw the remnants of the sandwich away, and I knew he was still under the influence of the opioid well before the opioid crisis of the modern era. And just as we left, she was snoring, and the dark haze was leaving his eyes. And I touched the doorknob, about to leave the house, when he began to cry. He got down on his knees and told me through sobs that he loved her. He loved his wife as much as he loved reality. He didn't want to leave reality. And he didn't want to leave his wife. He was done with drugs, he told me. And he pointed to the towel on the floor that I had used to cover up the wet carpet where I had cleaned the mess, telling me it was that fillet of fish that just saved his marriage. I was about to leave her, he told me. A fillet of fish saved my marriage. I lost track of him a couple months later after I moved to DC, so I'm not sure what happened to the couple, and I can no longer even remember their names. That's why I haven't said what their names were. It's been so long ago now. But I'll never forget the story he told of the fillet of fish that saved his marriage. It was shortly after the incident that I decided to order my first fillet of fish, and I can even say that since recording part 1 last week, it was today, in fact, that I went to lunch at McDonald's in honor of this couple's marriage, and my recording of part 2, which is happening now. I ordered a fillet of fish sandwich, and as I ate it, I was thinking about how I would end this story that I started last week.
Thank you for listening to the Josh Podcast Show, the anti-podcast podcast on God and man. For more information, visit joshpodcast.com. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh Rolfe. That's Rolfe, R-O-L-P as in podcast, H. Now go and have the best day and night ever. And have fun.